The hidden appetite. Every time you ask an AI a question, something happens that almost no one ever sees. A building the size of a warehouse, somewhere far away, quietly draws a little more power from the electrical grid. Now multiply that by billions of questions every single day, and you get a number that stops you cold. Artificial intelligence now consumes more than 500 billion units of electricity a year. That is more power than the entire country of France uses in that same year. And it is climbing fast, faster than almost anyone predicted. Training a single large AI model can burn through as much electricity as hundreds of homes use in a year. And then running that model, answering each request in real time, adds a constant, never-ending draw on top. The world's data centers are on track to double their electricity demand by 2027, and the vast majority of that growth comes from AI alone. One respected bank estimates data center demand could jump a further 160% by 2030. Two of the largest names in the field are jointly developing 4.5 gigawatts of new capacity, an amount that rivals the output of several full power plants. To the companies building these machines, this created a genuinely terrifying problem. They were running out of power. Not money, not chips, not brilliant engineers, plain electricity, the one resource nobody had thought to worry about. And to solve it, the biggest technology companies on Earth reached for the one energy source almost everyone had written off decades ago. They reached, of all things, for nuclear power. Why not just use solar? The obvious question is, why? Why not wind? Why not solar? The cheapest electricity that humanity has ever produced. The answer is a single word: always. An AI data center cannot afford to flicker, not even once. It needs enormous, uninterrupted power at 3 in the morning, in perfectly still air, under a pitch-dark sky, every second without pause. Solar stops at night. Wind stops the moment the air goes calm. To bridge those long gaps, you would need batteries on a scale that becomes wildly, impossibly expensive. Nuclear has the exact opposite personality. It is a source that almost never stops, running day and night for a year or more at a time, pouring out steady power no matter the weather outside. Engineers call this baseload power, the steady floor beneath the entire grid, and artificial intelligence has quickly become the single, hungriest baseload customer that the world has ever seen. There was just one enormous problem. Near these data centers, wholesale electricity prices had already exploded, rising more than 260% since 2020, and the traditional power grid simply could not keep up with the demand. A request to connect a new source of power could sit in line waiting for up to 8 long years, so the tech companies stopped waiting in that line. They did something the energy world had truly never seen before. Tech companies become power companies. They decided to buy the power plants themselves. In one of the most symbolic deals of the entire story, Microsoft signed a 20-year agreement to restart 3 Mile Island, the Pennsylvania plant whose very name, for decades, was shorthand for nuclear disaster. Now it is being switched back on for a single purpose: to feed artificial intelligence. Amazon moved too, securing nearly 2,000 megawatts of nuclear power through the year 2042 and pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into a company building a brand new kind of reactor. And they were far from alone. Across the industry, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta have together committed more than $50 billion to nuclear power. In early 2026, the first direct power agreements between big technology firms and reactor operators quietly began to close, a genuine turning point that the energy industry had spent years insisting would never actually arrive. Something strange and historic was happening in plain sight. The technology giants were no longer merely buying electricity from someone else. They were quietly becoming energy companies themselves. And they weren't only restarting the old reactors of the past. They were funding an entire wave of startups, each promising a completely different kind of nuclear, one that could be built not in decades, but in just a handful of years. To understand why that promise matters so much, you first have to understand why nuclear power nearly died in the first place: the small reactor bed. For decades, nuclear carried one crushing weakness. Building a plant took what felt like forever, and it cost an absolute fortune. The most recent large American reactors, built in the state of Georgia, finally came online years behind schedule at a staggering cost of around $35 billion, more than double their original budget. Projects like that scared away almost every investor in the country, so a new generation of companies placed a bet on a completely different idea. Instead of one gigantic custom-built plant, they would build small reactors in a factory on an assembly line like cars or aircraft. They are called small modular reactors, or simply SMRs, and the pitch is genuinely seductive. Build them in 3 to 5 years instead of 10 or more. ship them in standard, repeatable sizes, the way a factory ships any other product, each unit rolling off the same line as the last. Some are small enough to fit on the back of a single truck. Names like X-Energy, Oklo, TerraPower, and Kairos are now racing to prove the concept works, each backed by some of the most famous investors in all of technologies. But there is a real catch here, and honesty demands that we say it out loud. Electricity from these first-of-a-kind reactors is expensive, far more expensive than existing nuclear plants or renewables today. There is even a fuel problem. Many of these new designs need a special enriched uranium that is not yet produced at scale anywhere in the United States. The entire promise rests on costs falling sharply once enough of them get built. And nobody on Earth has actually proven that yet, which is exactly why the next piece of this story matters more than any other, the law that opened the door. Because none of this, not one reactor, can happen without permissions. Every nuclear reactor in America must be licensed by the government. And for decades, that process was so painfully slow and so costly that it quietly strangled the entire industry. Then, in July of 2024, Congress finally changed the rules. A law called the Advance Act passed with overwhelming support from both political parties by a vote of 88-2 in the Senate. Its goal was refreshingly simple: make it faster and cheaper to license safe new reactors without lowering the bar on safety itself. It cut the fees that advanced reactor companies must pay their regulators by more than half. It set a strict new time limit, a kind of shot clock, for approving reactors at existing nuclear sites. It even offered to pay back the full licensing costs of the very first companies to cross the finish line, a prize worth millions to the winners. And it made it far easier to build reactors on the grounds of retired coal plants, turning yesterday's smoke-belching fossil fuel sites into the foundations for tomorrow's clean and carbon-free energy ones. It was called one of the most important clean energy laws passed in an entire generation. And by the summer of 2026, the results were already beginning to show up in the real world. Where it stands now? This July, on the country's 250th anniversary, a government program had challenged reactor startups to hit a critical milestone with a fitting name: criticality, the exact moment a reactor sustains a controlled nuclear chain reaction entirely on its own. Not one, but 4 separate companies, small and largely unknown to the public, crossed that line right on schedule by the deadline. It is not yet a finished power plant, and it is important to be clear about that. But it is a real spark, hard proof that this new nuclear age is no longer living only on paper and in press releases. A long decommissioned plant in Michigan is now being brought back from the dead, the first time in history that has ever been attempted. A gleaming new reactor is quietly rising on the site of an old coal plant in Wyoming. Tiny microreactors are being planned for remote military bases, some as soon as next year. And looming over every bit of it is a single, sobering fact. Roughly half of all the reactors currently under construction anywhere on Earth are being built in China. In a high-stakes race, the United States very much does not want to lose. So the great return of nuclear power was never really about nostalgia or fear or old grudges. It was about a machine we ourselves built that suddenly turned out to be quietly, desperately starving, and the oldest, densest, most reliable power source we know rising up to feed it. Whether those small reactors can truly deliver on their enormous promise is, without question, the trillion-dollar question of the coming decades. Next time, what if we actually manage to solve fusion?